In this episode, you're going to hear from a genuine spiritual master about the powers and the experiences that you can have when you fully awaken the chakras. Hello, welcome back to the Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence. My name is Darren Ball, and this is the podcast helping you to awaken your chakras, unlock your psychic powers, and discover true spirituality. Now, in this massive episode about chakras, we're going to be sharing some of the amazing anecdotes and stories that are told by Dr. King about some of his experiences with spiritual powers, things like invisibility and even levitation. We're also going to be sharing some of Dr. King's first-hand descriptions of what happens at each chakra when the mystical power of Kundalini is raised through them in full. And finally, Richard is also going to be sharing some of his own profound insights into the experiences and extracts shared by Dr. King based on Richard's own profound experiences as well. Now, if you haven't subscribed yet to the show, be sure to hit that bell so you don't miss any future conversations between Richard and myself, particularly those that are coming up about chakras. We intend to focus on this a lot in our upcoming episodes.
Richard, Darren. Yeah, just before I'll say, people come up to me at events now and say, Richard, Darren. I'm from the show. And I'm like, all right, you're a watcher. Thank you. Yeah. But anyway, in today's show, I wanted to share with people some of the incredible information I think that we have from Dr. King about what happens and what is possible when you really activate the chakras. And I think, even...
It's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing because I think even a lot of spiritual people underestimate what is possible.
They do. I think, I know you've prepared a lot for this particular show,
Please
which
go
is great, and I'm going to sort of very much defer to you taking the lead on this show because I know you've got a lot of material. But what I would just say at the get-go is that Dr. King is like streets ahead.
Totally. Yeah.
Streets ahead of, I think he's, as far as I know, it's the only first-person description of Samadhi and cosmic consciousness by a true avatar. I mean, I stand to be corrected on that, but I don't think we have first-person descriptions from the Lord Buddha or from Sri Krishna, and he really nails it down. But I do want people to know, before you get started, this is taking it to the absolute ultimate level.
Yeah.
There are many, many stages for us ordinary mortals below that, such as myself, for example. And funnily enough, when you do have an experience way below the level that he achieved, you appreciate his level all the more.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a good point to start with because that's why I think there's such an opportunity to have this conversation with you. Not only because you knew him so well, of course, and a lot of these stories, even the biography, he told you, right?
Oh, yeah.
He told you first.
Several times. Yeah. And that was great. I'd love to hear him.
Yeah. But also because, now since you had your own amazing experiences, as you described, first-hand experiences of dipping your toe in the ocean of Samadhi, as you described, entry-level cosmic consciousness, I think that, it's just... I'm just saying it in your words because
I don't know words, and it's just a glimpse.
Yeah, it's a glimpse, and I think obviously, as you say, gives you a unique appreciation of Dr. King. And
it really does.
Of what he experienced.
It's a bit like, imagine that you'd never heard a particular, say, a Mozart piano concerto. I think it's number 21. One of the greatest anyway, and You're not a pianist. You're not even a particular musician. You go, you hear, you think, "Oh, that is truly amazing."
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's beautiful, and you appreciate it. But if you were a very good pianist and you go and hear, I don't know, Lang Lang or something, doing that concerto, you all think, "Oh my God, how did he do that? What an inflection there, and what a level he took it to, and so on."
Yeah.
And that applies to everyone. I mean, the more spiritual experience you have, actually, the more you appreciate greater spiritual experience.
Totally. Actually, it reminds me of the scene. I'll just throw in this for variety. From a movie called Gattaca, and they're watching someone play this piano piece. And at the end, the pianist stands up and he throws his gloves to the audience, and the protagonist picks it up, and he realizes that the glove actually has space for 6 fingers. And the woman leads over and says they can only be played with 12. That's
a good one.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing we're talking about.
You can do the jokes.
So I thought how we structured this show, we could go through each one of the chakras one by one. I've got a few extracts here from the 9 Freedoms, of course, our text for the show, and also some of the lectures of the Master.
Great.
And what I want to draw on, of course, is your the stories that he told you as well firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, he is the absolute benchmark. And I will say this too, he describes it in detail with a full understanding of Kundalini and a full understanding of all the chakras as you're going to go through. There are people, there's Yogananda, there's Sri Aurobindo, that there are people like the wonderful Hildegard of Bingen, 12th century abbess who had clear Kundalini experiences.
Absolutely.
And absolutely beautiful ones. But they didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I know my good friend Alan Mosley asked that very question of Dr. King.
Yeah.
What about the people who've described Samadhi? I mean, you don't find a mention of Kundalini or the chakras in Patanjali.
Very surprising.
In Buddhism, I don't think.
Very surprising.
You can still have these experiences, but Alan asked Dr. King, what of those descriptions that don't refer to Kundalini? I mean, are they real? Or he said, absolutely, yes, but they're missing something. And it's when you get to that nth degree, like he was. I mean, we're talking about a state that he entered, which would prepare him, I believe, for ascension.
Yeah.
If he'd chosen to take it, he didn't want to take that step. He didn't need to.
Yeah.
So what we're getting is a complete and thorough technical description.
Yeah.
As well as the beauty of it, which is described by a number of people.
Yeah, I think as you describe it, it's sort of like a timeless benchmark or yardstick that we can look towards, and it's awe-inspiring. Yeah. But there's so many steps along this journey in which we can have our own experiences and be inspired by those as well.
Yeah.
I would like to start with just one question though, to give some sort of clarity and context for people, which is that what is happening in our chakras most of the time, and then what is happening when you're really activating them in the way that Dr. King is describing here?
First of all, in virtually everybody on Earth, ordinary mortals such as myself and Yogananda, I would say, and I would say Arjuna, if you're familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, there are blockages, and I base that on some of the things, for example, in the case of Arjuna, that he was asking Sri Krishna, for those who know it. There are blockages, there are misdirections of energy through wrong nadis. This can be quite dangerous if you were to do the kind of yoga that Dr. King did. And let's be clear here, he wasn't following the path of service per se. I mean, actually, every breath he took was in service. He didn't have to really even be here. But he was following a very advanced path such as Kundalini Yoga, which is yet another difference in the way it's going to manifest. When I had my experience, I was 69. I had been on the spiritual path to a very dedicated degree, consistently every day for 50 years already, and practicing service. And so this will make the manifestation different. And also, Dr. King didn't recommend Kundalini Yoga to people, and nor would I. And coming back to the misdirection, Gopi Krishna, if people are familiar with him, wrote a book, I think around 100 years ago, I believe.
Oh, yeah, that one, yeah.
About Kundalini experiences. Yeah. And he, cutting a long story short, he believed Kundalini was rising up Pingala, which is on the right-hand side of the spine, not Susumna, which is in the center of the spine where it should travel. Okay. And he got into horrendous difficulties. Actually, I think possibly he oversimplified that too. Okay. There are thousands of nadis. So coming back to your question, where are we at with it? We have blockages in chakras. Sometimes we're blocking bad thoughts. Sometimes we're blocking good thoughts. We have misdirections, wrong channels through habitual habits, the overuse of chakras, the underuse of chakras, the misuse of chakras. And so therefore, that's why service, apart from it being the greatest path anyway, is a wonderful way to transmute, redirect, release blockages, and bring about this rise. But in the case of Dr. King, and this is what marks him out, this is something I really didn't appreciate till I did it to a degree myself. He accomplished a complete rise.
Okay, that's the distinction.
That's a massive distinction. Okay. I didn't. I don't believe Yogananda did. I don't believe Arjuna would have done either. They were given their states, actually, by their masters. A complete rise of Kundalini is a very different thing. And this means you must be purified. I mean, I know you're coming to the first center in a moment, but are you coming to the description of the pain he experienced when he first...
No, please share that.
Okay, so when he first raised Kundalini up through the base center, So, the fact that you raise it through the base center actually tells you something. It must come from below that position anyway. People have different ideas where that position
Where it is.
I have my ideas, or more than ideas, but it comes up. He suffered excruciating pain, and he says that he burnt up his karma.
Okay.
He was burning up his karma to go through that pain, the first time he did it particularly. But there are several reasons for that. One, it was a complete rise. It wasn't a partial rise, so that would be much more excruciating.
Yeah.
Two, it was being forced up. By the way, his karma, I will just say this, because he was in his 30s and very early 40s, at the latest in some of these descriptions. And he'd been practicing these advanced forms of yoga. So the karma that he's talking about there is the karma he took on and the karma he'd gathered in his youth, I would say.
Okay.
In his childhood, whatever karma he'd gathered there, and whatever karma he'd taken on by being born, that on earth, that's what he was burning up.
Yeah.
But those two elements, the fact that it was a complete rise, the fact that it was forced, the fact that he was using Kundalini yoga, it hadn't happened naturally in an unforced way through service, could make this untypical, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's very revealing of him, and he almost takes it as read that you're going to rise it, and this shows his complete purity. That's the point I want to come to.
Yeah.
He was able very quickly to balance out, if he needed to, redirect his nadis, his lines of his channels of energy, if you like, inside the aura, and bring them all to within the spine, which is why he had such stability. This is one of the miracles of Dr. George King having been with him.
Agreed.
The things he went on, and the stability and the balance that he maintained.
Yeah, despite
Always.
these incredible...
Yeah, complete control. Whereas, I think he said quite freely that Yogananda was quite unstable and could have been kicked out the ashram by Sri Yukteswar, but wasn't because he had fantastic potential. He was I would call him a genius myself. I would call him if there's such a thing, a publicity genius, but publicity for a spiritual reason.
Yeah.
And his master must have known that, seen that.
Yeah, knew that was his potential destiny. Yeah.
And he fulfilled it. But the stability, though, wasn't there in the same way. And it certainly wasn't there with me when I met Dr. King.
Yeah.
And he knocked a lot of weakness out of me, toughened me up, and made me a far more practical person. Because when you're around a master, you should adapt yourself to that master, not the other way around.
Yeah, yeah.
So, he was a practical person. He was a scientific person. He was a warrior. He was tough. It was no nonsense. You had to, as they used to say, man up, probably now woman up, whatever it is, but whichever it is.
Yeah.
But you need to toughen up around him. And he certainly toughened me up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, those are great insights into the nature of the relationship and the experience that you had with him. And I think it gives a lot of...
Not just me, by the way.
Sure, yeah.
Many others too.
It's just that you're the one I have here. So I think, with that in mind and just the context of the full rise of Kundalini, which is so rare, we can look at some of these experiences. I'll start actually with what happens when you raise the Kundalini into the sex center. And because I was quite surprised by this insight when I read it, because I think it put a whole different color on the chakra. And it speaks to the point you made about the overuse, the misuse, the underuse, and the bad rep that some chakras tend to get. So this is him speaking in a lecture. He says this: when that's the Kundalini, gets to the sex center, stop it and you will have a sexual yearning that you have never dreamt possible within man. But as well as this, he says, you will have a tremendous feeling for mankind. You will want to cry bitter tears. You will know what Jesus felt like when he wept tears of blood for mankind. Such will be your great compassion. And I was surprised by that because I thought, compassion, I thought, how could that be in that center? But maybe you have some thoughts you'd like to...
Well, I think one of the things I would say, and by the way, I want to say that I haven't led a completely celibate life. I am now, of course, my wife and I are now, of choice, have been for some years, but no, I have. So I'm familiar with that yearning and the exercise of that yearning. But what I would say is that I think what we do when we get a real desire for something, a lot of us on Earth, and it's not just sex. It could be there are other things that you can desire from that center. Greed of various kinds, some things that you could indulgences of various kinds, basic delights you might call them.
Yeah.
You know, you could have things like gluttony. You could have things like gambling addiction, and various things could be, I'm not saying entirely, but partly driven by the yearnings and the desires that can come, the appetites.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
But coming to sex, a lot of us, when we have desires of various kinds, it applies to other centers too, by the way. And because he was so pure, I've noticed Dr. King didn't dwell very much. That's a rare extract you've got there on the effects of the lower three centers.
Yeah, he didn't.
He really goes straight to the heart.
He does. Yeah.
And up, usually.
He does.
And that's his advancement.
Yeah.
But the lower three centers are very important, as I keep coming back to ordinary mortals like me and all of us on Earth, really. And when we get let's take another example from another center. Let's take the solar plexus center. You know, the sort of let's take the lower three centers in general. I don't want to sort of say it's only the solar plexus, but this desire for material advancement in general, the materialistic urge, you might call it, in its various forms, we tend to think, right, that's what I need to do then. That's what I'm going to do. You know, I feel, inverted commas, turned on, so therefore I have sex. I want more money, so therefore I'll work harder to get more money. And this is where you are being ruled by the energies within those centers, as opposed to you starting to control those energies.
Yeah.
If you feel that strong desire, it's not a bad thing, as a matter of fact. It may sound strange to say, because it's activating. But it's what you're going to do with that.
Yeah, what you're
going to do about that. And as I say, it's taken me decades to get there at all. But that's the sort of stage you get to. Now, in terms of the sort of the compassion, people will know from their intimate personal relationships of one kind or another. They may not be physical. They may or may not be physical, but they will know you feel great kindness. You feel well-disposed. You feel loving, you caring, and that's all linked to it. That element of it is a good element of it, providing it's not possessive.
Yes, yeah,
and that could be spread, as Dr. King says, to others, to strangers, to people in general. So you can feel, but I think very much from my limited experience of these things compared to him, very good. Concern, compassion, kindness, well-disposed nature towards individuals of all kinds, whether you know them well or not. That's one thing that you could use. That's a positive aspect, because all the centers are good. Yeah, all of them are good.
I think that's a great message.
How we use it.
That's a great message to share here, and I thought that quote, your insight there is wonderful, because I think it really gives us an appreciation that, as you say, they're all good, and it's what we do with energy when we begin to experience it there.
I think I'll just say this one thing. I think many people would say, and do say, and I've heard them say, that they made the wrong choices in their relationships, in certain cases, not always, but in certain cases, because they were driven purely by the physical attraction element.
I see, yeah.
And that could be. Doesn't mean there isn't the person for you by any means. It might be part of how you're relating, but that on its own doesn't necessarily lead you to the best person to be your soulmate.
Yeah, that's good insight, because it's. I think we could come on to it a little later, but it's sort of like allowing the higher inspiration to influence your lower centers, rather.
The higher chakras should govern the lower ones. And many people, it's the other way around.
Yeah. No, it's good. This is another interesting one, I think, quite surprising. I think even inspiring. He says this, and we're still talking about the sex center here. When Kundalini actually rises in the sex center, one has clairvoyant powers. Surprised, aren't you? When Kundalini rises up to the solar plexus center, one has appreciable clairvoyant powers. When Kundalini rises here, and he's talking about the Christ center in that case, one has great clairvoyant powers, and of course never uses them. Yes, because you see the subtler power is not its use, but its control. And you've talked a little bit about that. And then he just tells this little story, which I think is great. He said He says, I used to play around by giving clairvoyance in the early days, by telling people how many pound notes they had in their pocket and what the numbers were. And I could get them dead right, If you had 10 pounds in your pocket, I'd give you the 10 numbers on each pound note.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's an incredible feat.
I just can't,
That's incredible. No, he's told me those stories.
Yeah.
And he even did that in quite early days, such as during the war.
Yeah, okay.
So when he was in the fire service, a section leader in the fire service in the Blitz.
Yeah.
And so, he would do that with other people in the fire service and so on. So what would he be then? I mean, he'd be in his 20s,
Yeah, 20s. Mm-hmm. And he's told stories, hasn't he, about using his clairvoyant powers at that time to find people who were buried under the rubble. So,
he did do that, which is great. It's a wonderful use.
I mean, it's not a skill that many people have in the fire.
That's great retrieval teams need.
Yeah.
Clairvoyant.
Imagine that, yeah. I mean, it's good to hear from you what you think about that because of your own, extensive clairvoyant experience.
I can only tell you the honest truth, which is I wasn't aware of it, particularly being the clairvoyance I developed, particularly coming from the sex center. I mean, it may well have done.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of it.
Sure.
I'm very aware now, though, of the solar plexus center and the difference between seeing a light, which seems to be through the third eye, which is actually coming from the solar plexus center, even though it's seeming to be.
Yeah, that's a good insight for people.
Yeah, and the real thing. As a matter of fact, one of the things that stimulated me and inspired me and motivated me to try to, it wasn't the main thing, but one of the things that motivated me to try and open the third eye, which is how I really started this, look through the third eye, was I got fed up. If it sounds odd, I know, with getting impressions, even good ones, even accurate ones. It's an odd thing to talk about, but I got the point. I don't want this anymore. I did psychic things for a long, long time, and I still do sometimes actually. But I thought I don't want impressions. I want reality, and I want to see the third eye. I don't want to get a feeling of what it might look like or an impression of what I'm, this or that. If I see someone on another realm, I want to actually see them. I don't want particularly to get a feeling of them. I could describe what they look like, and I used to give readings, not to anywhere near the level that Dr. King did there, but he actually set me up to give reading.
Oh yeah,
he designed my crystal ball cover and helped me, I'm sure. But I could get very accurate results, but they were all impressions, and I think this comes from the solar plexus center.
Yeah, okay.
I don't want to take well away from where you're going, because we haven't got the solar plexus center yet, but I am now aware, which I wasn't at the time, that a lot of my clairaudience, because I've done a lot of channeling, a lot of mediumship, and very accurately, and some of it provable in terms of details that we've given and so forth. I now realize came from the solar plexus center predominantly.
Okay.
And why does that matter? It matters because actually the sounds that you really hear, and I'm sure you'll come to this later, are in the heart center, not the solar plexus center. So they are still impressions. It's a mental center. It's a lower brain. The Christ center is a higher brain. It's a lower consciousness. The Christ center is wisdom. The solar plexus center is understanding.
Yeah, okay.
And it's always going to be limited. When you get to the heart center, then you're really getting to higher consciousness.
Thank you. There's it's just speaking about the clairaudience. I mean, I know you have a lot of experience with that. This pulled out this quote here, which I think was fascinating. He says, he's talking now about raising the Kundalini to the solar plexus, as you describe. Right. And he says, you'll be able to hear people talking miles away. You'll be able to hear people talking in other planes who've died 20, 50, 200, 2,000 years ago. And you'll be able to cut out most of the conversation we hear and tune into a particular one. You never know. There might be a very advanced soul who will tell you very much and you will learn a great deal. And you'll become gradually aware of the intersection of the planes, the physical plane intersecting the so-called astral planes. And you will think, oh, isn't God's creation marvelous?
Well, there you are. I mean, I wasn't familiar with that quote. I'm sure I've come across it, but that's exactly what I started to realize. And it was interesting because when I started, and this is only in the last couple of years, to really activate the heart center in a more controlled way, I could hear some of the sounds associated with the heart center. Actually, not the pealing of bells.
Okay.
Some have heard that. My wife Alison, for example, has heard.
Oh, really?
That. She's heard that. But other sounds, which we might come on to.
Yeah.
There was one particular sound that Dr. King gave me because he knew I did clairaudience. I got messages, strangely as it may sound, on one occasion at least, for him. It's actually from Sir Winston Churchill.
No way.
And I gave it to him. It's when he received the freedom of the city of London, which I think would be 1986.
Okay.
5 or 6, I think 6. And then he got a message for Sir Winston Churchill. He'd done some work for Sir Winston Churchill, actually, during the war.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Undercover work. I think it can be said now. Okay. Under the official secret.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So...
You mean like using his clairvoyance or something?
No. He wasn't alone in it.
Okay.
There were a number of people who helped with intelligence-related work.
Got it.
Yeah. But he told me, I think this would be in about 1985, he kind of tested me. Without going into all the details, he asked me to listen for a certain sound from a cosmic intelligence to communicate something. And, I think that was, very gracious of him. But I will say it quite openly, I failed. I felt the point that was being delivered. I had a feeling. It was a very simple point, by the way. It was virtually yes or no. And the feeling I had was correct, but I didn't hear the sound. And I mention that, I think, because he had such faith in people. I think when he gave some of the talks you're going to quote from, the writing in the Nine Freedoms, in those days, I think he really believed that he did it, others could do it, others would do it.
Yeah.
And he always had confidence in that. And sure, they will one day. Yeah. But he realized, I think, as he got older, people aren't doing these things, very much.
Yeah.
But when I started to develop psychic powers, he gave me this opportunity. I didn't hear the sound. And I look back on it now, and in the last couple of years, I've heard that exact sound that he's described to me. Not in the context of receiving a message, but I've heard that sound. That's a sound that's associated with the heart center.
Okay.
It's identified by Swami Sivananda and others, actually, as a sound. I found this more recently. So I just think I wasn't at the level he required. And he had the faith to think, oh, well, Richard's getting this. He must be tapping into his heart center. And I realize now it was the solar plexus center. And I'll say one more thing, strangely enough. If you overuse a particular center, because habits form within the aura, and you'll go to that chakra, and in some strange way, rather than being a stepping stone, it can become a blockage because you're used to operating in a certain way. You're used to listening. It's a little bit like when you do develop clairaudience. If you've got very acute hearing, my physical hearing becomes far more acute when I'm channeling. Nikki Wood, who I've worked with for over 40 years, will tell you this, that I can hear things physically much more, in a room several stories down and so forth. Yeah. When I'm working in that sort of a way. But that isn't the sense that you want. You have to. That's why you block off your physical senses to hear it. Yeah. And in a similar way, if you're used to doing clairaudience through the solar plexus center, your consciousness will tend to go there, and it could even inhibit that faculty in the heart center. I always focused until recently on the light in the third eye because my main thing was clairaudience.
I see.
I didn't really know why, but now I can see why. Because the heart center sounds weren't the sounds I was getting, but I'm coming back to my point. They were impressions.
I see.
In this clairaudience, it wasn't actual hearing, which is what I wanted to get to.
So basically, just in some
mental
of one of the points, you were moving from operating the solar plexus center to operating in the heart center.
Now
hearing that sound.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Because he does talk about some here. You've mentioned you're talking about the heart center here. Some of these forces sound to him like a giant bell. I think that's the one you're talking about.
I haven't heard so much a bell. I've heard a drum. I mean, and lots of people. I'm certainly not alone. Have heard different sounds. They call anahata sound, which is the Sanskrit word for the heart center.
Okay.
Yeah.
He again, this is the heart center. He gives this other story here. You may have heard it, but this is from a lecture, and he's speaking. He's talking about. He says basically at this stage, the aspirant is capable of advanced psychic vision. That's what he says in the 9 Freedoms. And this story he tells in the lecture, he says, I remember other instances where, again, through dynamic prayer, I could easily see through walls and so on. I remember an instance where I had been praying for peace, but putting everything I'd got into it. 2 people walked into the room afterwards, and they were both giving each other healing. And I couldn't see the physical bodies of these people at all, although they were only a few feet away from me. Strange to say, I could see the auric bodies completely and the bone skeleton of these people. And they were there, one skeleton bent over another skeleton, giving them healing with lots of lights around. I just can't believe it. And in fact, I could feel hold of one of the skeletons and say, by Jove, you've had a broken rib and it wasn't set very well. I could see these so plainly. Well, these are the kind of clairvoyant things which must come.
I mean, his advancement is incredible. I mean, you asked me, was I aware of this? Was I aware of that? And I wasn't. I was a little bit aware. Some people aren't aware at all. I don't think hardly any medium on the planet. I'm talking about good, accurate, proper ones. There's lots of fakes, and there's lots of people who aren't fakes, but they are a bit deluded. They're really getting their own subconscious or something like that. Yeah. They might be a good person, but they're not really enjoying. But I don't know of another medium. I'm including Alice Bailey. I'm including Madame Blavatsky, who's even has said, well, my Kundalini was in this position when I did that. And this chakra was awakened to that. Yeah. This is the precision of Dr. King. This is the unique, I'm going to say, absolutely unique technical definition that he gives that you just won't find anywhere else.
No, I think it's absolutely, I think in general, the theme is this very precise technical description of exactly what's happening.
He was a scientist. He used to said to me many times, at the end, I'm a logician. But his logic was directed by his higher self, by his wisdom, by his faculty of awakening the Christ center. Yeah. So it wasn't just a sort of a logic in a vacuum. Yeah. Which you'll get. I mean, there's so many blockages that people can create through wrong thinking and wrong assumptions and wrong programming. Yeah. And he was just free of that. He was directed all the time by his higher consciousness. Here's another one. We're in the heart center again because there's so many amazing things that he describes that happen here. He says, you can levitate the physical body and stand and watch it float around the room and laugh and say, what a strange toy that is. I mean, it's almost like... I mean, shall we talk about his powers? I mean, there again also, what about that for stability? Yeah. Some people would freak out, wouldn't they? Seeing just a skeleton.
Yeah.
Or starting to fly. And of course, as soon as they did, it would stop. Yeah. And he remained stable, focused, because he knew, and this is the beauty of his purity, he was completely celibate throughout his life. Yeah. He had full control. He wasn't motivated by material gain. He was a remarkable individual in every sense. And also, and key to what we're talking about, Kundalini was rising up the spine. Yeah. Now, most people, these higher centers are used. For example, I know we haven't got there yet, but the throat center is a center in which you can write wonderful things. Yeah. You can compose wonderful music. Now, I would certainly believe that some of the musical and literary geniuses of history were tapping in to some degree, even if it's a small degree, to a high center like that, even. But the way they were doing it was through other Nardic channels in many cases, I would suggest.
So not up the spine, full rows.
If you did it up the spine, as he did, you'd be an adept. You wouldn't just be a genius. Yeah. An adept is a genius. I mean, his definition of an adept is someone who can raise the Kundalini in its entirety to the throat center. Got it. I actually don't know of anyone on Earth right now, on the physical plane, who could do that. Yeah.
I think it's a great point to emphasize again, because many people think this is
in its entirety. Yeah. And there may be people who think they do, and that would be their problem in many cases, because then they're not aware of their own blockages and their own... But coming back to your musical or your literary genius, they might have quite convoluted Nardic channels in order to tap this higher inspiration. And this is why a lot of them, you only have to look at their lives, were very unstable people. They were people who could write the most wonderful, compassionate, caring novels, such as a Dickens, and I don't know whether this is true, but we're told he could also be quite an unkind man. I don't know whether that's true. I don't really want to name names, but if you look at them, there's one composer who threw a bowl of hot soup over a waiter and so forth, and yet could write sublime, elevated music. So there was an imbalance which would have been rectified if they had a copy of Realize Your Inner Potential.
You get your copy today, folks.
And they practice the practices as given by Dr. King in that book. And then the energies would start to flow in the right direction. The point I want to make is, though, you can start, to some degree, people do start to tap in. They're not used much, but I want people to think, well, I'm not using my higher centers at all.
True.
People are using them. They're not necessarily using them in a fully controlled way, and certainly not in their fullness. The lower centers are far more in use than the higher ones.
And actually, this is a great theme that we're definitely going to come out to on a future show, because the overuse, the misuse, the kind of misdirection you've talked about of the energy through the different centers, I think is a great topic to explore.
It is
to help people better understand what's going on.
It really is, and the wonderful. I mean, I will say it's only because I've had the two experiences you described earlier in the show, that I appreciate these things, that I'm aware of these things. And by the way, you don't have to be aware of every detail. You don't have to follow a nod. You'd never get there. Where does this go? What does that?
Sure.
It's a broad understanding of the situation and how you can rectify it, and you can rectify it. But I'm going to run some events this year which will, at a much, much more basic level than this, and tell people how they can start to clear these blockages and release themselves. And it's a strange thing. It's a wonderful feeling. The most simplest thing of all, just to be in control of your inner energies. You may not even see them as energies, but your motivations, you are, and some of the Zen people used to say, when my master paints, he paints. They're very simple, but you're doing what you are doing. There's no convoluted discoloration of motive and all the rest of it. You are what you really are.
I think there's a point there. I'll just make that what's so good about that is that people don't necessarily appreciate how intimately related the function of our chakras is with every aspect of our life. This is not just something it's like you got your life and then you got the Phillips with it. It is the whole thing. It's
everything. I mean, the chakras are the second most valuable thing in existence, says Dr. King.
There you go.
He said they're the most valuable things except for one, so it's the same point. And the only thing that's more valuable in the chakras is the life, and of course the Kundalini on Earth is the life.
There's just coming back to this point about levitation.
Sorry to just finish that. I don't get wrong. As is prana in its pure essence.
Absolutely. So, just come back to this point about levitation. He told it was witnessed once by his niece, wasn't it? Or his sister?
Yes, his niece. Mark Bennett interviewed her for the biography, The King Who Came to Earth, and she then revealed she had seen him. I believe he was in the lotus or Padma position on a settee. It's over. I should know because I wrote the book with Brian Kniep, but it's described in there. But she saw him physically lift up off the sofa, and he was a person who didn't really talk about his experiences if he could avoid it. He talked to teach, and only to teach. And you can see why. I mean, the only reason I really want to share my experiences is because I want people to see that this path, the Ethereal Society path, King Yoga, whatever you want to call it, works.
Absolutely.
And can take you there. And this is a different path than the one he followed in those days to achieve his powers.
One other one he talked about here was, he mentioned one of his lectures, when the Kundalini pierces through the heart center, you can become invisible at will. I think that's this is not going to superhuman, isn't it?
You can become. He says you can become invisible at will. He also had experiences where it just happened to him. Once was in Brighton, and he was doing breathing exercises, and very intently, actually, on Brighton Pier.
Oh, yeah.
And then he was going to a conference. There might have been a spiritualist conference.
Okay.
And he came up the pier to go in, and he was walking up the steps, and nobody could see him. They were walking into him, and then he suddenly became visible.
Wow.
And another one was after an intensive night of spiritual practices, which he would do for hours, 8 hours, say.
Yeah.
He went into a tobacconist, and he was in a queue, and he was invisible. And he didn't realize it because he couldn't really see why the tobacconist was ignoring him and going to the person behind him. And he got a bit annoyed, and then he suddenly became visible.
Okay. Yeah, you can imagine their faces
And
trying
just like, ashen. Yeah.
Well, I think it's incredible. I mean, he told you these stories, and I can imagine.
He did, in a very conversational manner.
Yeah.
As though it's the most natural thing in the world, sitting in his armchair at the Theory's house in London. I'd be sitting at the table.
What an incredible experience.
I mean, he developed a lot of powers, more than most powers. And I want to say this, not everyone needs to develop all the powers, and different people will get different things. And you can develop certain powers before you reach this kind of stage, such as a relatively basic level of mediumship, such as, certainly in my case, past life recall. Such as, I mean, one of the things when you do tap into a higher chakra is language and words. But with Dr. King, there were another one would be astral projection, by the way, Will, which I that's the most difficult thing I've ever tried, done, and I certainly couldn't do it like this afternoon. But I did do it, and I did talk while Dr. King was alive, actually, and I did talk to him about it, which was helpful. But he himself, he had it down. I mean, he could just go quickly if he had to. Out the body, I'd have to get to the right spot, lie down, go. Usually lie down.
Okay.
So he kept some powers. I mean, he had tremendous powers of energy manipulation. He had powers of devic control. So he could invoke a storm diva, which is also something I noticed from the Mahabharata quite recently that Sri Krishna did, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And and they called it Indra, but it was clearly because these gods' names are used variously, clearly a storm diva, and stopped to storm. And Dr. King did a similar thing. So he had those powers. He had tremendous psychic self-defense powers. He, as you mentioned, he had things like levitation, supreme strength, physical strength.
We'll talk about that one because that's
Well, he had that actually even as a child at school, where he found he could actually bend a metal bar, so much so that at his school, which was Gisborough School, it was a grammar school, I believe, he was taken out of school because they thought, this is dangerous, boy with this strength. It was actually shown around the physics class just to show that you can't bend it.
Okay, they were handing around this bar.
Steel bar, and he just bent it.
God, I can imagine that face.
He was his mother was very good, he told me, when he told me the story. Told me more than once that story, and she advised him to get a knapsack, go out to Rosebery Topping, which is near where they live. Beautiful place. You've been there? I've been there. And just camp there and then let it settle, which he said was really good advice. But again, his stability was such, he took it I would say in his stride, but he handled it. Much later on, he had an experience where he had a Kundalini rise. He was in Waterloo, without going into the whole story. It's a part of London. And he ran to another Maida Vale, a very different part of London. It's quite a long, so much energy.
A few miles, 3 or 4 miles, isn't it?
And he went to, his mother wasn't well. There's quite a long story attached to it, because there's even a case where he prevented her dying or raised her from dying. This was the time, and he had a massive Kundalini rise, ran to another part of London. Those days, there were these old metal telephone boxes. And
classic. People will know that.
Very strong and robust. It just was opening the door to phone her, and the whole door came off.
Gosh.
So that's another thing. So some of these abilities, like levitation, great strength, invisibility, weren't things that he used. But some of the others, such as great healing powers, he healed someone who would have, I think, the curvature of the spine. In the old days, they called it hunched back.
Hunchback, yeah.
But again, I noticed that Sri Krishna in his youth did exactly that too.
Wow,
Yeah,
interesting parallel.
like these are things I've just come across.
Damn.
But yeah, he had healing powers, energy, and of course, above all, his mediumship, his samadhic trance mediumship, which, as far as I'm concerned, is completely unique. The way he did it,
Yeah.
and the accuracy and the perfection of the voice.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. A good summary, I think, in general there. I'll share just a couple more about some of these other chakras here that he talks about. This is the throat chakra now, and I think, even more astounding when we move here. He says, this is from the Nine Freedoms now, he can hear the tremendous vortex of power within the Christ center above, which physically sounds to him like the rushing waters of a gigantic waterfall. In fact, at first he cannot hear anything else except this. Then, as he becomes more attuned, he hears the subtle symphony of life. He can hear a tree growing, a man talking to another miles away. He can hear a cloud form 2,000 feet above him if he thinks about it. His hearing becomes so acute that he can hear the subtle sounds of whatever he dwells upon. He can even hear the screeching high-pitched whine caused by a beam of light as it careers through the envelope of gas molecules which surround the planet.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, incredible.
There's a beautiful description of just a whole world we cannot even begin to imagine until we have a description like that.
And it's interesting because the heart center, and he hasn't mentioned this, but elsewhere he does mention this, is a center where you can experience bliss. Tremendous peace. Kind of peace that can stay with you for hours and you don't know whether it will ever end.
Yeah.
And it can go, you think, oh my goodness, it's almost like you're almost disturbed by peace, if you can imagine.
If you can imagine.
That's your lower self is disturbed by, or your conscious mind.
Yeah.
But you see, all the time you are meant to move on and up and higher.
Yeah.
So you go beyond that peace and higher, and then you come to a level of inspiration that you've never encountered before.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm a complete novice talking about this, and those experiences described there, I haven't had other than maybe distant hearing on one occasion, but not like he would have done. But, he really sort of boils it down there. And it's interesting because the throat center is a center. It's highly inspired. It's like the high. There's a phrase in the Nine Freedoms, actually, the transmutation of mental energies upon the plane of inspiration called high intuition. I think that center, when you're sort of gaining adeptship, if you do it like he did in its entirety, you are really tapping into the highest level of inspiration on that plane of high intuition.
It's so.
You are a genius, at least.
Yeah, it's so inspiring.
Yeah.
He actually this one other point I wasn't going to share, but I'll just say it. He says when he does this, i.e. bring it up to the throat chakra, he is initiated into the great mystic language, not the language of TUL, that is even greater. He is initiated and knows immediately, even a second, a great mystic language which gives unto him a considerable amount of wisdom. He can speak this language fluently. He can't write it because it's not possible to write it, but he can speak it fluently and at all times and evoke power and force to help his friends, even his world, by the use of this particular language. I'd never heard that before.
No, I mean, I don't know. So what I'm going to say now might be wrong, but I believe it's a language that changes. I believe it's a language of sound.
Okay, so sound.
As opposed to words.
Okay, yeah. He goes on in another lecture and he says he can project the body and leave this earth when Kundalini is operating in the throat center. And then he also says he's capable of splitting his consciousness and being fully aware of at least 3 or 4 aspects of consciousness at one and the same time. And then it says, and so on, which is just so characteristic.
Which he did, which is quite phenomenal. And it's certainly because way above my pay grade.
Yeah, I mean, splitting your consciousness into two, I mean, that's quite interesting. But let's go into the Christ Center.
And he did that in some of his missions, by the way, operated on 2 levels at once.
Yeah. So he's actually there's another one that he may have used. So share this one about the Christ Center, just a quick exercise.
This is a biggie now, this Christ Center.
He says he has a great vision, either back through time or into the future. He has a vision of things happening on other worlds. I think that's going to a whole nother level in terms of, clairvoyance. I mean,
well, that's beautiful because that, and this isn't a criticism. Some of his descriptions in different places are slightly different. And sometimes he'll, how can I put this? He'll keep it to the earth.
Yeah.
But there, you see, you can have he's going beyond this world to other worlds, even in the Christ Center.
Yeah, and actually,
so that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, even in this next sentence, actually, he's exactly to your point. He says he can even, if all other conditions are right, leave this earth and visit places like Saturn and so on, which few people have ever done.
Yeah, that he has done.
Yeah.
No, exactly. That's remarkable. I will just say this for us, again, ordinary mortals.
Yeah, good.
There are, and which I don't think he had in that way, because, as I say, he came to earth in that life pure and without what they would call samskaras. These are habitual lines of thought which repeat, and they take energies. There's a total link between energy and thought all the time. One leads to the other all the time, both ways. But there are three major granthis, as they're called, or blockages. Okay. I think they are slightly misunderstood by some people. I don't believe it's a crossing over of Ida and Pingala per se.
Okay.
But anyway, that's a detail. But they are between the solar plexus center and the heart center. That's the first one. That's a massive transition. You leave the lower three centers and you go to your higher consciousness. You might even say your real or true consciousness.
Yeah.
And then there's one between the throat center and the Christ center. And in my limited dipping my toe in the ocean of Samadhi experience, I had tremendous resistance, internal resistance, to moving from the throat center to the Christ center. And because I think my conscious mind, there was a fear.
Yeah.
A fear of losing yourself.
Okay.
It's hard to describe. He may not have had that. He had experience of loneliness.
Yeah,
though,
that's right.
which is, again, the loneliness for an avatar is very different from most of us.
Yeah.
But I definitely had that resistance, because then you're going into trance. You know, the Raja yogi would say the subject, the person who's meditating, the object of their meditation, and the mind process or the consciousness all become one.
Okay. It's
a trance state. And you're no longer thinking per se. You are knowing. And to me, the other thing I experienced, because I've only done that, I've only had two experiences, and they're the two I've revealed, no others.
Yeah.
Of that caliber.
Yeah.
That caliber.
Sure.
Tremendous relief in my case.
Well,
because then you know.
I see.
Up to then, you've believed.
Okay.
You've felt.
I see.
You've had the impression
this is an inspiring point. Yeah. This is
you thought that, you've had lots of evidence. You've had lots of experiences. But suddenly you know. Oh.
Yeah, for yourself, directly.
You absolutely, this is real. Yeah, and what you he describes it brilliantly, the state. I think it's in his lecture, Concentration, Contemplation, Meditation.
Okay.
He dwells at length on what you can achieve through contemplation, the middle stage. These are slightly different terminologies than the ones used in the old Sanskrit, which would be dharana, dhyana, samadhi.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
But in that contemplation stage, he takes it to lengths that some would have called samadhic, actually. I think even Sivanandas would have called, like lower levels of samadhi.
Yeah, I agree with that, yeah.
But when you get to true meditation, Dr. Kingsley, he doesn't say a lot about it, but he has this brilliant praise. He said, the abstract why. And it's an interesting thing. Your consciousness goes to different things. So in my case, one of the things that my consciousness went to was a hedgehog. Now, I didn't sit there and think, I think I'll meditate on a hedgehog. It's not like that.
Yeah.
A higher part of you knows where to go. But if you're very psychic and you tuned into a hedgehog, you could pick up a lot of things about that hedgehog. You could, through those things, develop real compassion for that hedgehog. But when you meditate, when you become one with it, let's say, you don't only know the sort of state it's in, you know why it's in that state and why it needs to be in that state. Or even, let's say, with a wild animal, maybe even a ferocious animal, you know why it needs, and this sounds very odd, I know, to be ferocious.
Do you mean like because of its experience that it needs?
It's the experience cycle, and in that state, you know why.
I see.
Before it evolves to something greater, as a path to evolving. At that point in its evolution, you can see why it's like that. And you can see why someone on a higher realm, for example, would like to be here, and why they aren't here, and how they feel about that. And if it was on a lower realm, you can see how a very bad force feels about those who work for it. But you can also see why they have to work. This is the paradoxes here, because they could change at any given moment, and then they wouldn't have to. But at that point, they have to work through a certain line of experience, even if it's negative experience, in order to go back to God.
Yeah, I think what's beautiful about that is it really takes you out of the frame of our so limited human experience.
Yeah.
And, beginning to see the why of things gives you just such a broad perspective.
And that's what, I personally always wanted, when I was like from the age of 14 anyway, like, why? Yeah. And the thing that upset me was that people didn't really care. But not really care.
Yeah.
They were like I did. And I'm thinking you've had the same thing. And others,
asking those questions,
some of our listeners and viewers will have experienced that. Why aren't other people? I'll tell you why, because they're not as advanced as you are, frankly. They're more easily satisfied.
Yeah.
They think they're satisfied by a great material pleasure or indulgence, and there's nothing wrong. You can have a holiday, fine, I do, but there's a part of you wants more if you're more advanced, and there's a part of you wants to serve, And in the end, all this, as Dr. King always comes back to, is all about service.
Yeah.
You serve because of the love in your heart. You serve because of the high inspiration in your throat center. You serve because of the knowledge which comes from your Christ center. And eventually, you serve because of the oneness in your crown center.
Yeah.
Like he said to that yogi who came up Holston Down.
Yeah.
And Alan heard the whole story.
Oh, yes. Go on, yeah.
I've said it before, although it's so good.
Yeah.
And he said to Dr. King, I've been to the Godhead. And Dr. King said, did you take your hat off? Because he had a sense of humor.
Yeah.
And then he said, yes, so, okay, you've been to the Godhead, so then you know that all is one. And so the only thing to do is to serve.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. I just want to finish with one quote, Dr. King, to bring that to life a little bit as well. He said, when we talk about the Brahma Chakra now, no longer was he a light in the wilderness as he had been before, but now he was an essential part, an intimate part, an interrelated part of all things. His consciousness soared above the environment, above the city in which his cold body sat immobile, around the city, around all things and all people and all environments. Soaring upwards and outwards, he was now in the full and complete realization that he was life. And that's our journey, I think. Well, I think that was an awesome show there, Richard. I think, you touched on so many points there that I think really help us to appreciate his experiences, especially from the perspective of your own.
He's the benchmark.
He's the benchmark there.
We're very, very fortunate, and I'm certainly fortunate to know him. We're fortunate to know of his teachings. He's been very generous in sharing a lot of this.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more he could have said, but I will come back to the fact that in his case, it was all service. He didn't actually, I don't think, really needed even these experiences. There could well be some avatars who've come to Earth who haven't entered some of these states because it wasn't necessary to their mission.
Sure, yeah.
But they would know these things before they ever came here.
Yeah.
But in his case, he needed to gain powers on the inner planes in order to perform his mission, not all of which was on the physical realm.
Yeah, no, it's a good point to make. And I think if nothing else, is our great inspiration or inspiring even about our own potential, about what's possible.
It's all there for all of us.
Yeah.
It's a benchmark and you can measure yourself against.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we're going to be doing a lot more shows about chakras. There are so many points that you've raised there that I'd love to explore more in future shows.
Sure.
I will just say as the last thing before we go about your upcoming event.
So this workshop has come about as a result of experiences I've had and realizing my own limitations, actually, things I probably should have realized a long time ago, and their vital importance and the wonder of them, the beauty of them. They're all good. Every chakra is good if it's used correctly. Obviously, the higher ones should regulate the lower ones, not the other way round, and lift the lower ones, but they're all necessary. They're all essential. I've also realized one other thing, though, as well as that, that the spiritual practices of the Ethereal Society are absolutely second to none, and nearly all of them are designed to work through the chakras directly. And a lot of people haven't really thought about that. Actually, I went through them all with Alison when we were on holiday. We went through every practice we could think of. And virtually every one of the practices that we've been given by higher sources, by Dr. King, from yoga, are chakra related. And so these are things that can transform your life.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. So I look forward to those events, March 1st in London, March 8th in Barnsley, and to exploring this whole amazing field of chakras much more on the show. Thanks very much for being here today.
I think Richard put it really well there, that when we are looking at Dr. King, when we hear about the experiences he had, we're looking at someone who is an outstanding yardstick about what is possible when you go all the way. But also, it begins to reveal to us what we can begin to experience for ourselves as we take those steps gradually to awakening each of those chakras in our own spiritual journey. The other big takeaway I have from that show is that the chakras are not just some interesting aspect of spirituality or something that, we can talk about the colors or how they loosely associate with different qualities and all that. No, they're intimately related, completely related to every aspect of our life and our spiritual evolution. And really beginning to realize that potential is about realizing our superhuman potential within us. Powers like levitation, like invisibility, like superhuman strength, etc. Many of the ones that Dr. King recounted in those stories that we shared. But not just that, and possibly more importantly, wisdom. Wisdom to know that all things in creation are one and that they are the expression of the one life, because it's that realization towards which we are going. Now, if you enjoyed that episode about chakras and spiritual powers, we have so much more coming up in the next few months about the chakras, so be sure that you're subscribing to the show. You can also check out this video over here, which goes deeper how you can begin to experience deep, profound spiritual peace through the chakras, or this video over here in which we go deeper into how to unlock your intuition. And if you can get to London or Barnsley in early March of this year, look for more information below this episode about Richard's upcoming event, Awaken Your Chakras, Key to All Spiritual Powers. Thanks for tuning into the show. See you next time.